if you're an engineer or engineering leader coming from a world that's either had to build everything in-house because of security or scalability or dependencies that you can't have on third parties, then it makes sense that you're oriented around that. And that's the norm. But we do have engineers that often introduce us into the organization because they don't want to do the grunt work of having to maintain tooltips. That's not a fun job for any engineer. So while building the first version might be fun because it's quick, but when you have to maintain that and make small adjustments that end up sitting near the bottom of the queue and someone's pestering you about it, people realize, hey, maybe it's better to hand this off. Having said that, there's always an engineering component because of installation, and we have to often undergo a security review and performance testing. And so engineers are always involved to ensure that we meet the standards that they have for their stack and the tools that they depend on. But it's not as straightforward as engineers are against it and product managers are for it.
Hey, welcome to this episode of Build versus Buy, a 30-minute conversation with product and engineering leaders about situations during their career where they've had to decide whether to build or buy. If you'd like to be a guest, reach out to me at Mang-Git@useanvil.com. That's Manggit@useanvil.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating/review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Enjoy this episode.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Build vs. Buy podcast. I'm your host, Mang-Git Ng, co-founder and CEO of Anvil, the fastest way to build software for documents. And today, as my guest, I have Pulkit Agrawal. He is the co-founder and CEO of Chameleon, a tool for building UI and testing different UIs. Thanks for being on the show today.
Excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. And as always, we'd like to start with a quick introduction of yourself and maybe dive in a little bit about your product, what it is, and why you built it.
Yeah, so I guess the most important part of my introduction is that I'm a Liverpool fan. It's a soccer team that I've been supporting for maybe 30 years, and we've just won the Premier League title in the UK. That's a big part of how I'm feeling. But aside from that, I did grow up in the UK. I now live in New York after maybe 10 or so years in the Bay Area, where we started Chameleon. It started off as a project and an idea around solving the problem of it being difficult to learn software. So when a new user signed up, and for us, it was signing up for Asana, we felt we were having to read through a lot of documentation, watch a lot of videos, and then try to recreate some of those things in the app. And we wanted it all to be a lot more contextual, a lot closer. And so we said, hey, why don't teams do it? Or why do they rely on this really old school way of doing it? And found that it was just really hard to build user onboarding. It often was a project, a multifunctional project. And that project took a lot of resources and ended up being often done over a quarter. And that would include user research, design sprints, implementation, iteration. And once you were done with it, you didn't really want to come back and work on it again and again because it wasn't a pod or it wasn't back then. It wasn't really a growth team that just worked on iterating on this. And so you put it on the shelf and you waited for maybe a year. And then you're like, wait, we need to fix our onboarding. And you'd go back to it. So it was a very waterfall approach. And we felt onboarding very much like the website of a product required adjustment, iteration, personalization, and wanted to offer teams a way to do that without being dependent on engineering resources. So that was the origin of Chameleon. What we do today is solve a variety of use cases for customers. And our customers are software companies or software-enabled companies that want to enable their users to use more of their features. That includes getting onboarded at the beginning, but then adopting functionality over time or driving upsells or reducing churn. And they do that through running in-app campaigns. You can think of them as almost like email campaigns, but in-app. And they can help teach features, drive discovery, help people become power users. And you can do all of that without code. So you can create your banner, your modal, your walkthrough, your highlight, whatever it is. And we've branched out into things like interactive demos or like the command case search. And there's other things like that. But you can do all of that in your application, make it look and feel native, control who sees it, and analyze how well it's working, run tests, and iterate to help drive more usage of your product.
Wow, there was a lot packed into that intro here. I think many of the things you mentioned really resonated with me. To start, I would say, just in case users are not clear, when Pulkit mentioned learning software, I believe you're saying learning somebody to use somebody's software, not building software, right? With Asana, it's highly configurable, but to actually understand and know how to use each of the features of Asana can be quite challenging. It's a lot of work. But yeah, and then the onboarding, this is something that we experience all the time at Anvil. It's like you build something, and this is great. It should be almost, you think it's intuitive for somebody to learn how to use it, and then nobody's using it. So you need to revisit onboarding. How do you encourage people to use it? How do you encourage them to go look for those features or know that it exists? And so we have the same problem where we're building onboarding, like once a year, we're revisiting onboarding, and the product has evolved every time. So you got to think through, how do the new product features play into onboarding? What are the most important ones to highlight, and how to navigate a tool like Anvil, which is a very powerful tool, but also we're trying to make things simple. Onboarding is clutch.
And I think, you know what? I think the problem is going to get worse, because at least from what I'm seeing in the last few months, there is more and more stuff being built. And whether those are AI features or features built with AI, but this pace of development is increasing, which means the noise for users is increasing. And for myself as a consumer of software, I'm really struggling to keep up to date. Oh my God, like what changed? Like if you just focus on even like the AI tools, I'm like, there's a new thing all the time. And I'm like, oh my God, wait, what can I do with this? And can I do that thing with it? And so I think that there's going to be more and more of a challenge to break out from this noise and help people connect with the things they really care about, and not leave them feeling overwhelmed, but helping them find these aha moments to become really sticky with your software and ultimately become power users and proponents that help drive word of mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting you mentioned AI, because like on the one hand, a lot of people think of it as a paradigm shift in how you communicate and interact with a computer. It's natural language, you're typing, you're just prompting it, right? But to your point, a lot of people are using AI to actually then build more UI that is just, the floodgates have been opened, and now users have to learn all these different UI paradigms, and people are constantly coming up with new ones. And then mix that in with the enterprise software kind of user set, where if you move a button, you get a bunch of complaints from the enterprise users, right? Where they're like, the button's always been here. Why did you move it? I think maybe a funny aside, at one point we had a enterprise company using Anvil, and we got a complaint that was exactly word for word, make it look like DocuSign. And we're like, oh, we're not DocuSign, we're Anvil. So I think that's an interesting way to think about this, which is, as much as people believe that the future is conversational and prompt-based and prose, there's still a lot of UI being built. And I think we're like building more, building faster. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just check out ChatGPT. There's UI being added all the time. But yes, you start with it being conversational prompt. But I think the key thing is to delineate conversational versus chat. And yes, we want products and software to be conversational with us because we want them to respond to our needs in that moment and be very personal. But it doesn't mean all of that should manifest just as chat. And actually, chat is a super inefficient way to do a lot of work. For example, if I'm creating a PowerPoint slide, like me trying to chat with PowerPoint to create a slide sounds terrible, because I want to adjust something and it's very visual. And so I think, yes, great that we'll have more chat, and chat's almost like a shortcut to the future world of really personalized predictive software. But I think it's really important to note that there's still a bunch of UI that needs to be built to make it efficient and easy for users, and recognizable and repeatable and scalable and testable, all the stuff that, chat makes it hard to do.
Yeah, that absolutely. I think that the thing about UI, just as it is with like software development, is it's a lot more deterministic. It's a lot more constrained. So when you do something, you know what the output should be. Whereas with chat, because it is prose, it is a little bit more fluid. You could prompt the AI to do something and it doesn't do what you want. And therefore that interaction just becomes a lot more cumbersome and a lot more tedious than it would have been if you just had a button to click, right? Awesome. Well, with that, and talking about building things and building UIs, I think I would like to pivot to the core topic of our podcast, which is build versus buy. And when we were talking before the call, you mentioned that there are two ways that you would like to slice it today. And One is maybe talk about high level, a build versus buy decision that you've had to make, and then really refocus the conversation back to the build versus buy decisions that you see your customers make on a regular basis, both for your product, maybe for other products. We see the exact same interaction as well with Anvil, and we'll talk through what are some of the questions we get and the challenges that people have and how they decide whether to build or buy our products and ultimately what happens at the end. So maybe to start, let's go with build versus buy story that you might have from your own personal experience.
Yeah, and we'll stay on the topic of UIs for this. So Chameleon, we went through a rebrand maybe a few years ago. We said, okay, look, we want to do a brand refresh. We didn't change the name or anything, but we picked a new font, we picked some new themes and style colors and a palette and typical things. And as part of that, we said, hey, we want to refresh the UI of our product in our dashboard. And so we pretty diligently came up with a refreshed set of components. This is what a drop-down should look like and the different states of buttons. And this is how modal interactions should happen. And yes, we based it upon some existing libraries, etc., but it felt like it was going to be our own. And that is pretty diligent to maintain that, because every time you want to add a new component, there's some discussion of, hey, do we need a new component? Can the current component solve for this? But then to add it, you have to then add it to Storybook or something that helps maintain that library on the engineering side, and then find all the places it's used. It's hard work. But that was just the normal way. And I would say that was a decision inherently that we made. And then now we're working on a new side product, which I'm excited about, but it's super early. But we're coming up with that question again. Okay, we're building a UI for it, and we're trying to be super fast. We're trying to be AI first. And so as we thought about the component system that we had previously, we said, hey, we just want an off-the-shelf solution. Mm-hmm. And we're going to use that as our component library. And yes, we'll style it with a theme. And we chose Radix UI, which is built by our friends at WorkOS, and a really impressive project. And so we're really just like buying that really and going to use that for all. And so in some ways, we're going to try and limit the options in the UI based on what's available as that library. Say, hey, look, if it's not available off the shelf, let's avoid needing that as a component. Let's find a different way to offer that interaction or view the product. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about why we made the change, but I think it speaks to us thinking about where do we need to have uniqueness and differentiation, and what is our unique value proposition, and does it come from some of this stuff? And we decided, no, it doesn't. We want more and more similarity and consistency in UI between us and other software, so it's easy to learn and use. And so we decided to use that and buy that.
Interesting. Tell me a little bit more about Radix UI. I'm actually looking at it right now. I hadn't heard about it, even though we use WorkOS, so plug for WorkOS, and we're big fans of them over there. But yeah, tell me a little bit more about Radix UI, and then maybe we can dive into some more nuanced discussion around why Radix versus other component libraries. There's definitely open source component libraries out there as well. But yeah, why Radix?
Why Radix, or I guess why Radix specifically versus others?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think part of that is because there's already inbuilt trust with WorkOS. We use them as a provider and very happy with them. And we've seen that project grow up. We've been familiar with it for some time. They recently released themes, which allows it to be, I think, as easy to use Tailwind CSS or something. And so we felt like that's been good development on it. It's credible. And WorkOS almost has some insight into the type of components that people may need because they're doing such core flows for customers. And so the fact that they kind of are coming up with this library made it an easy decision. We did not do a thorough side-by-side evaluation or comparison of multiple libraries, partly because we're familiar with a few of them. We've used Tailwind before, etc. Some of the engineers that vouched for and suggested Radix had a lot of credibility. We said, okay, let's just go with this. Also, the second thing is that we're really orienting around speed in this new product. And so unless it feels like something that's going to be really restrictive in future, we're orienting around shipping and not worrying too much about the decisions about which tooling at this stage.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point that you brought up right now, which is and trust in the product can really go a long way in deciding to buy the product, right? I think if this is a new product from a company that you've used their products before and they work well, that decision just becomes easier to just, hey, let's just expand and use this next tool that they're releasing versus let's go spend a bunch of time even doing the research, right? Even do the research to find out about competitors. So that's a
Yeah, I think
fascinating.
it's the same reason. Yeah,
Yeah.
people like buy the same software again at new jobs. But I think that it's also just the value of building brand. And I think beyond brand, building relationships and people
Mhm.
knowing who you are. Nowadays, people buy from people as much
Yeah.
as they buy from brands and companies. So if you've built that reputation and your team is reliable, then I think people will trust you. And in this world where people are shipping new products and everyone's trying to be AI fast, I think if you are shipping something new and have a bunch of trust behind you, I think it can be a really compelling combination.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe this is a good time to pivot the conversation a little bit to Chameleon. I think when I think of Chameleon, I think of it as a tool that's very much aligned with PLG, right? Building nice onboarding flows so people love the product, use the product. But you just mentioned people buy from people. And maybe there's a little bit of tension there as to where do you think the build versus buy decision happens when it comes to something like Chameleon when you talk to your customers, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think actually there is one underlying, or maybe there's many underlying drivers of the decision. One of them is people. And maybe expanding that is the culture of the organization. So there's some organizations orient much more around build
Mhm.
versus buy, and some orient around buy versus build. And the same with individuals. The second thing is, I think, someone's familiarity with this kind of category of tooling. So when someone comes into a role and is responsible for driving improvements to user onboarding or activation, or their team wants to run in-app campaigns to drive awareness of new features, if they've had prior experience with this category of tooling and they've had success, they're far more likely to open the decision to explore options. But if they've had a negative experience, I think they're much more reticent to do that. So I think that's another kind of driver or context that we have to deal with. And then I think it's people's awareness of what's possible. I think if someone's only aware or someone thinks of this tool as building clunky walkthroughs or building walkthroughs, and well, we don't want to build a walkthrough, we want to build tiles in our product, then they will likely not be familiar enough to even consider a buy. They might be like, okay, well, we have to build this. And so I think there's an awareness play, which may be similar to your past experience, but our team's aware of what's possible. And so I think those are a few factors that go into the early consideration of whether we want to build versus buy. And then maybe it's if you've already got a system that you've inherited, let's say a VP comes in, but there's already an existing system of building this, then it can be harder to there's a sunk cost in there. So it can be harder to switch to a new thing. So maybe those are some considerations really early on before folks undertake an evaluation or go compare.
Yeah, absolutely. I think breaking down that a little bit, let's talk about each of those areas and what you see. I think the first one you mentioned, or if I recall correctly, is that the orientation of the individual, right? Like some individuals are much more oriented towards building, some are much more oriented towards buying. And you could probably roughly correlate that with the type of role the individual has, both historically and in the organization, right? So I think one common thing that we've seen with Anvil is that engineers who do need to use Anvil are typically more oriented towards building. They're like, PDFs, how hard could it be? But we've also found that second-time founder engineers, second-time product people, or engineers who have built a PDF system before, they're like, absolutely, hell no, I'm not touching that. Hire somebody. I do not want to do it, right? So tell me a little bit more about that experience when working with a more technical person. Presumably, Chameleon does require some code or some, at least pulling in some kind of library to use in your code base. Yeah. How does that conversation go?
Yeah, I think there's also maybe how progressive is your tech stack is an angle to that, or what have you been familiar with? If you're an engineer or engineering leader coming from a world that's either had to build everything in-house because of security or scalability or dependencies that you can't have on third parties, then it makes sense that you're oriented around that. That's the norm. But I think that we do have engineers that often introduce us into the organization because they don't want to do the grunt work of having to maintain tooltips. That's not a fun job for any engineer. So while building the first version might be fun because it's quick, but when you have to maintain that and make small adjustments that end up sitting near the bottom of the queue and someone's pestering you about it, people realize, hey, maybe it's better to hand this off. Having said that, there's always an engineering component because of installation, and we have to often undergo a security review and performance testing. And so engineers are always involved to ensure that we meet the standards that they have for their stack and the tools that they depend on. But I think it's not as straightforward as like engineers are against it and product managers are for it. I do think there's PMs that have been burned by clunky looking in-app experiences and they want to build a beautiful UI. We know that user experience is becoming or is really key to adoption. More and more software is self-service and people are buying decisions without any of your representatives in the room or interfacing with them. And so in some cases, people are in to be like, hey, we want to build this in-house to have more control over this. So I see kind of both angles. I think it is complex. I think it's also further added. There's a complexity in our category because this category isn't super new. The category's been around for about 10 years. And so it means that people have had some experience with either legacy players or something. And so there's all of that baggage that we also have to try to work with or deal with to be like, hey, we're different. This is different. Yeah. So I think there's a bunch of selling in a way that we have to do to convince people to give it a shot, even if they've had not a great experience with another provider.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of comes to your second point, which is negative experiences in the past can really shape how a individual proceeds with future decisions. I think maybe a question for you that I was just thinking about right now is like, again, going back to like self-service kind of product-led growth. It's interesting because Chameleon, again, seems to be a tool that people use to drive self-service growth of their own product. But perhaps, and I'm just taking a stab here, your motion today is a mix between self-service and maybe sales/solutions engineering. Is that kind of how your Chameleon go-to-market motion works?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it can sound like hypocrisy or irony, but every startup starts small. And so it doesn't mean that you should only serve small startups because you yourself are a small startup. Some small startups serve larger enterprise customers. And in that case, you have to go through a sales assist motion, even if you're a small company yourself. And in a similar way, yes, we do enable product-led growth for companies, but our sweet spot are companies that are larger than us. Mm-hmm. And their requirements can be detailed. It's often they have very clear visions of what they want to accomplish. There's long evaluation criteria, and we do offer a sales assist process. Now, we try to be product-led in the sense that you can sign up for Chameleon without any gate. You can try our product without a credit card. You can implement without any talking to anyone. And so there you can go live and even go all the way. So I think we try to build that in, but we do for anyone that we think would expect or benefit from a sales assist process, we will reach out and try to engage them. But we've also tried to make the process more transparent and more self-service. So we packaged a lot of the stuff that we coach during sales conversations into a buyer's guide. Said, hey, look, let us make you an informed buyer so that whether you want to go self-service or you want to speak to us, you are in a better position to negotiate, to understand, to criticize, to evaluate. And so we try to be as honest as possible. I wrote most of this 20,000 word guide around understanding the space, understanding the different features that different products might offer, understanding use cases, thinking about an implementation plan, how to run an effective evaluation. We had documents for it to run, like compare a sheet on how to compare. Like we did a bunch of stuff to make that process easier for buyers, to make it more self-service, because we believe that. We think that's better user experience, and people don't want to be stuck having to get on calls if they can get this information knowledge separately. But I don't know, it's not necessarily the most used or read tool either, because it's hard to consume. It's one of the reasons we get on a call to learn something that you could otherwise read as well. But we're trying.
No, that's a great example of a way to kind of like help customers make these decisions a little bit more on their own, right? We too run into the same issue. Like Anvil ends up becoming kind of like this critical layer in a company's software stack. And some customers, they are fine reading all the documentation, figuring out how to implement Anvil, but they never want to talk to us. And a huge portion of our customers, like maybe the larger portion of our customers actually that pay for Anvil, actually do want to get on a call. They want to get on a solutioning like discussion. And we found that without that solutioning discussion, a kind of toy project built on Anvil that then is trying to scale can quickly get out of hand without kind of some best practices on how to manage it. And the buyer's guide as a tool seems like a really great one.
Yeah, good plug for it. Hopefully more people read it.
Yeah, everybody go read the buyer's guide. Well, I'll make sure that it gets added to the show notes here so everybody can go read it.
Sweet.
And then I guess that actually does lend itself to the last thing that you mentioned at the beginning, which is capabilities awareness, right? I mean, obviously capabilities awareness is listed in your buyer's guide, but if we were just relying on customers to discover what is possible, it could be a very long onboarding journey, right? They might drop off before, and the longer the journey is, the more likely that they're going to drop off and not use the product. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about how you help your customers learn about all the capabilities in Chameleon, or help your customers teach their customers all the capabilities in their product, maybe.
Yeah, I can answer both of that. I mean, it's all about understanding the customer's priority and intention and then personalizing to them. It's the same reason that when you get on a demo call and some rep just goes through a script with you and you're like, oh my God, this is infuriating and you're wasting my time, versus someone's like, hey, I've researched and I think your use case might be around improving retention. And here are 3 features that I think can help you. And you're like, great, actually, this is interesting. Let me ask you about this feature. And so I think, how do you do that in a self-serve way? Well, you have to either infer intent through where they came from, which campaign they came from, what their role might be, etc., or you have to ask them about intent. So you see that many products will ask some questions in a sign-up journey. Unfortunately, this is something I've been researching recently. I've learned that most companies aren't making good use of that data, but the hope is that you ask these questions and then you personalize. And some simple ways to personalize is you direct someone to the right place in the product to begin with. Hey, where are you going to find value? Let's say you're the first, if you're a B2B SaaS product and you're the first user, or someone's creating an account and they're the first user on their account, that's going to need a different entry point than someone who's an invited user.
Yeah,
that's a relatively straightforward one. But let's say that someone's an executive, like maybe they need a different entry point than the same as a general user. So I think personalization through things like routing, personalization through campaigns, and there can be email campaigns or in-app campaigns. But let's say you've got someone and you can identify either through the sign-up questions or through some other way that they're kicking the tires. And for every software product, you'll have people who've just discovered it on TechCrunch or something. And they're like, let me try this out. And so they're kicking the tires. They're not ready to install your product in their code base. Prompts to do that are not going to work. In fact, what they want to do is get a just general overview. How can I use it? Show me some examples. And that's a very different case to someone's like, hey, I'm in the market for this. I want to get it. I want to try it out for real. So I think that we do need personalization. I think and we try to help our customers do this by giving them the tools to segment their in-app campaigns effectively and to personalize them. I'm working on this new project around the sign-up questions. Like I said, if anyone's interested in talking about sign-up questions and making better sign-up questions, then I'm happy to chat, DM me on LinkedIn. But yeah, I think personalization is key. And I've spoken to so many folks that have given me data, product leads from Dropbox and other big companies have shown me the data of like how much of a lift they can get by personalizing content. And so I do believe that's where the crux of self-serve use, better self-serve growth is. And it's something that humans can do easily or can have the ability to do easily. And I think software is lagging a little bit, but hopefully it'll get there.
As you were talking about having that interaction where it's like, hey, I think you're trying to do something and here's like a pointer to help you do that one thing based on some interaction or some inferred data. I was just thinking of Clippy in the bottom corner of Microsoft where it's like, hey, it looks like you're writing a document. No shit, I'm writing a document. I'm in Microsoft Word, right? So I think doing it poorly can be just as bad, just as much of a turnoff from an experience perspective that users, unless you're doing it comically, I guess, maybe. The user probably.
No, but I mean, this happens all the time. Like you get a tooltip on a CT and it says, click this button to progress to the next step. I didn't need to know that. You've wasted my time. And I've now built negative sentiment towards this tooltips because they're not adding value. They're subtracting value. They're adding noise. And so it's really important for any in-app campaigns and for any campaigns. If you think about sending emails, if you add a bunch of crap at the beginning, people aren't going to get to the key thing and they're going to unsubscribe or they're going to start to like zone out your emails. It's the same with in-app campaigns or UI or anything else. If you add noise to it, people are going to zone it out and going to tune out, and then you lose the channel, the credibility of that channel. So whenever you do any kind of in-app messages, it has to be really on point. Now, it can be really hard to get timing right. It's super, super hard to get timing right, to understand what is the user caring about in this moment. So one of the solutions for that is to be less interruptive. And for example, with Chameleon, you can build embedded experiences, which basically sit in line in the page. So think of a banner that sits in line, or a little tile or card that sits at the bottom of a navigation bar, and it says, hey, check out this thing that's ready for you. And so when you then are done with your stuff, you can then engage with that. We offer some other features that we try to make you leverage this point. So we have this smart delay feature, which waits for the end user to be done with their current task before displaying something. Again, trying to get into that place where it's like, hey, let's not be interruptive. Let's try to catch them when they have a moment to pay attention. So I think it's really hard, but it's really important to not be annoying.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nothing's more annoying than having to clear a modal or something while you're trying to do something, right? Especially for somebody who's familiar with the product already. So those are some interesting features. I mean, I think we evaluated Chameleon a while back when we're looking at different tools, and we ended up just building a little component, and now I'm regretting it. Right, this is what happens when you have a team of engineers and only engineers making all the decisions. Oh, I'll grab a library from it. I'll just fork this thing on GitHub. And
how funny! We have a case study. We have a little case study right here. We should dive into that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we usually ask our guests if they would have made the same decision around building versus buying near the end of the conversation, but I think we've talked mostly about our experiences on the kind of like selling side of the buy decision. So maybe I'll ask a slightly modified version of this question, which is going back 10 years when you first started the company and knowing everything you know now and everything you've done thus far, would you still be building the company, or would you have gone in and taken another job somewhere?
That's a good question. I think if it depends what my goal was. I remember way back, I wanted to learn how to build a business. I was considering going to do an MBA. And this has been the most phenomenal education in the world of business. And I've built a lot of relationships and cherished friendships. And I've learned more than anything I know about anything else in this. So I'm pretty grateful for it. I think it hasn't been financially lucrative for me. So getting a job would have been probably a better bet to live a more comfortable life. But I would trade it in.
I feel like those are all the lessons that you learn as an entrepreneur. You go into it blinded by the excitement and maybe your vision, and then realize that, oh, wait, there's actually a lot of steps on the way there to make that happen. I appreciate the honest answer there. Cool. Well, to wrap up the episode, we do have two fun questions that we ask every guest. The first one is always tell the audience and share with the audience something that you've been working on that you're really excited about, that you're able to share. It can be personal, it can be work related, but just something that you're really excited to share with the audience.
Yeah, I'm working on a new product that will complement Chameleon, but it's a new thing. It's built with AI from the ground up, new code base, and it's really trying to tackle the account creation flow and make that more intelligent and smarter to begin the personalization journey even earlier for our users. And so I'm looking for design partners right now. We've got a few, and I'm actively working on them, which is really fun because I've been both coding, I've been being a PM for something, I'm in the early phase of validation, doing a lot of user interviews, which has been a really fun change from the day-to-day of running Chameleon. But yeah, that's a fun side project that I'm working on, aside from preparing for a baby, which is another project that I probably should be investing more time into.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like somebody who also recently had a child, you don't realize it's happening until the baby arrives and, oh shit, now I got this other thing that I really want to spend my time with, right? But it's so much fun. Yeah. Okay. And then the last question that we always ask is share a product that you recently purchased, and then it could be something that you either really loved or would never buy again. So we'd love to hear one thing that you purchased that you would like to talk highly of or talk smack of.
I was trying to think of something I could talk smack about because that maybe would be more fun. But one thing I purchased recently that's a subscription software that I actually really like is something called Whisperflow. And it's basically the ability to dictate to your Mac in any kind of written field. So whether it's writing a doc, writing a Slack message, writing an email, etc. And it just sped up my workflow a lot because I'm able just to speak, and it does a good job of summarizing that and taking out adding the right punctuation and formatting, etc. So I was on a free trial for a while, used it, and then eventually I'm going to buy the subscription. So that's something I like, and I would endorse for others as well.
That's awesome. I mean, I think my wife would hate me if I bought Whisperflow. I think I'm a pretty loud person in general. So if she's like trying to sleep next to me and I'm speaking into my computer, I'm certainly not going to be whispering. Let's put it that way.
That's funny.
Cool. Well, Pulkit, it was a real pleasure having you on the show today. Really enjoyed our conversation and talking about just like more of the other side of the build versus buy decision, like somebody who's actually trying to sell software to other companies who are making the decision. So really appreciate your insight, and can't wait to see that new product that you're working on out in the wild. And I'm sure there'll be lots of people that listen to the show that want to learn more about that as well. So we'll put that out in the show notes when it's ready.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a fun conversation, and I learned some stuff as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you found this show valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or here on YouTube. We'd love if you could leave us a rating and/or a review, as that helps others find this podcast. See you next time.